Cats doesn't have many stories about failure. For the most part, our protagonists are cats who succeed or excel at their usual clan tasks, and the only things they may briefly get wrong are huge, clan-altering decisions to do with the plot. It's very rare to see a perspective where an apprentice isn't good at the hunting or fighting they are trained for, and even rarer to see that failure extended for long enough for us to see the insecurities ingrained in their mental states. Because of that, it's not at all a surprise to me that so many fans enjoy the character of Alderheart. By his initial concept at least, he is a unique character with an interesting and realistic set of faults, who may well be deeply relatable to plenty of readers. It didn't last forever, but the version of Alder we were presented with at his introduction is certainly an interesting character to examine. When we first meet Alderkit, in the very first page of his introduction, the first thing we learn about him is that he worries about and questions things around him that others find exciting. Nearly every cat we've seen facing an imminent promotion has reacted with anticipation, excitement, looking ahead to the future that is open to them, and so on. Alderkit, though, seemed deeply afraid of the unknown world that would come with this next step in his life, worried about the possibility of a test that we implicitly get the sense here he didn't believe he would pass, and gets so lost in thought and the what-ifs of the situation that he doesn't realize his sister is near him and is startled by her sudden presence. As far as we can tell at this point in the story, he has no reason to be especially worried. No one has told him that the ceremony will be anything but a rite of passage, or that he already has to know anything to be an apprentice or warrior, and his sister Sparkkit, who grew up under the same parenting and care, is as excited as we've come to expect from a kid about to become an apprentice. Lacking any clear source for these nerves to come from, at least so far, it does seem at this point like Alderkit's worry might be a more intrinsic part of his personality, rather than a result of circumstances. These worries don't stop at kidhood, of course, and once he actually is an apprentice, they begin affecting his performance rather than just his thoughts or feelings. On his and Sparkpaw's first day out of the camp, he starts rather well, scenting an unfamiliar clan and logically deducing, based on what their mentors told him, that the scent is from WindClan. However, after completing a tour of the territory, Sparkpaw is still eager for more and asks for a hunting lesson, which Alderpaw doesn't believe he's ready for, while trying to keep so much in his head already. When both apprentices are asked to look for prey, Alderpaw does catch the scent of a shrew, but questions his own certainty, leaving just enough time for Sparkpaw to sneak up and make the same point, confidently and aloud. Sparkpaw's continuous and seemingly easy successes only make it more difficult for Alderpaw to perform, as he begins worrying about how he can measure up to her, and the extra hesitation he adds, thinking about how he can't fail or doesn't know if he has it perfect yet, causes him to miss opportunities altogether. All of this was on the first day alone, but similar patterns continue through his apprenticeship, as he can't help comparing himself to Sparkpaw's exceptional performance and getting nervous about the possibilities of his own failure, leading to many wasted opportunities, poor performance, a weaker reputation, and low self-esteem. All of this is only heightened further as other cats' disappointment in him leads him to feel validated in his negative view of himself and his own potential. Once again, leading him to hesitate even more, perform even worse, and continue this cycle without much improvement. I'm going to take a step back to talk about this situation in a more general way, one more applicable to our lives in this world. In the realm of education, mistakes are a very good thing. Different school systems in different eras have often done poor jobs of communicating this properly, but mistakes are the only things that give us room to grow and direction in which to grow, and in more than just a philosophical sense. Making mistakes actually, physically improves your brain. With each mistake made, more and stronger physical connections between different parts of the brain are formed, allowing you to get the right answers or do the right things more easily in the future. On a functional level, mistakes literally make you smarter. With that said, mistakes can also be painful, especially when they are made in the view of people you want to respect you, or when you can compare yourself against someone who is making less or different mistakes. And even this early, Alderpaw falls into both of those situations to a T. His mother and father are the leader and deputy, so he already has a lot to live up to and people he wants to impress. But he also wants his mentor to be proud of him so he knows he is doing well, and stack up against Sparkpaw so he can say he and his sister are on even footing. As time goes on and he racks up failures while she does nothing but excel, the very cats Alderpaw had hoped to impress start expressing subtle and sometimes overt disappointment in him, which makes the mistakes hurt even worse. Because of the sheer levels of nervousness he feels around his own worth and performance, and the sometimes paralyzing fear of failure that stops him from doing anything, Alderpaw hasn't had a chance to learn or grow stronger from his mistakes. he has only been able to suffer and grow less healthy on a mental level. His poor performance and a supposed connection with StarClan eventually lead him to being forcefully removed from his training as a warrior and made a medicine cat instead, which only makes him feel worse as he considers this to be a product of his failure as a warrior apprentice rather than a good opportunity. It isn't helped by the fact that no one asks him for his opinion in the matter and instead just tells him he will be a medicine cat after discussing it behind his back, but they make it clear that it isn't a punishment, and he cannot believe them. This is anxiety, a fairly textbook expression of it at that. Anxiety as a feeling just means particularly intrusive nerves in relation to some upcoming or believed to be upcoming event. An anxiety disorder, meanwhile, which I believe Alderpaw can easily be argued to have, is a more long-term experience. The specifics of what precisely defines an anxiety disorder are still being debated, and the sources and severity of one person's anxiety and another's can vary wildly. But what is clear is that anxiety disorders are characterized by persistent fear or doubt in average daily activities. This fear is often difficult to control, comes on quickly in response to both situations that would and wouldn't otherwise be fear-inducing, and can often involve physical fear reactions in your body and layers of doubt, berating, or worst-case scenarios in your mind. Alderpaw has had doubts about himself and how well his life would go since he was a kid, and those doubts have explicitly gotten in the way of his happiness and successes numerous times at this point, which itself is enough to say he's a good portrayal of at least one version of an anxiety disorder. Unlike with cats like Violet Shine, Shadowsight, or now Nightheart, Alderpaw's feelings here aren't created by endless eternal bullying or pushing his confidence down to force him into a state of self-doubt, but by his own thoughts betraying him. Even the prophecy and quest to find SkyClan that marks his first big responsibility as a medicine cat ends in failure. As both a real-world parallel and a remarkably unique setup for this fictional cat series, the potential displayed in just this first book is enticing. And then it all disappears. Even in the second book of this arc, Alderpaw's characterization turns away from self-doubt, anxiety, and the weight of failure, and onto caring almost exclusively about SkyClan and the kits that he and Needlepaw found, Violetkit and Twigkit. You might note that these two elements make up the main plot of the arc's first half and encompass the two new protagonists he was, in a sense, passing the torch on to. It is important to make sure the protagonist is invested in your plot, but it is coming at the cost of losing much of what made Alderpaw unique and compelling in the first book, without much reason as to why he would act this way. When his failed mission to SkyClan comes up in the beginning of Thunder and Shadow, as Alderpaw recaps the previous book for us, he doesn't dwell on his failure, doubt his abilities, or even decide that he can't be focused on himself when there was still someone to save. Instead, he seemingly does no thinking, loudly and impulsively defending SkyClan and arguing that they still needed to save it. Later, when he's thinking over the prophecy again, he doesn't hesitate or think over the possibilities at all like he likely would have in the first book. Now that he's been given a plot to follow and a drive to pursue, nearly every trademark of his anxiety seems to have melted away. I say nearly because there are still some moments where his heart will quicken or he'll wonder why someone wants to see him, but in the same page they will still have him confidently bustling about the medicine den or getting irritated with rather than worried by Jayfeather's attitude. I should make it clear that anxiety disorders are definitely not a matter of being constantly miserable or never getting better. Anxiety is absolutely something that can subside or be managed with time and help. But a turnaround that comes on this quickly after Alderpaw just returned from a failed mission from StarClan, and with no reason for the change, seems jarring. At this point, the only topic or cat he seems nervous around is Needlepaw, and that's because she's an unpredictable pseudo-friend of his who is the only cat able to take care of Violetkit, one of the two beings he has most chosen to care about. Even at their worst, most battered and hopeless moments in the following book, Shattered Sky, his thoughts read identically to any other protagonist worrying about current events, more dejected than anxious. And of course, through all of this, Alderheart is still acting as a nearly flawless medicine cat with no worries about his own skills or abilities. I've often heard people say that it is in the fourth book, Darkest Night, where Alderheart's original personality fades completely, but I honestly think it came earlier than that. The only difference is that in Thunder and Shadow and Shattered Sky, Alderheart still had immediate, valid things to be worrying about. So he still expressed the standard protagonist amount of worry for those things, and because of that, his change was less noticeable. Darkest Night quite literally opens up with Alderheart happily declaring that everything is fine now, he has nothing to worry about. and that worry, and his original potential, never return. Given how much I discuss characters' potential and my disappointment in the routes they actually went down, I feel it is important to point out that wasted potential isn't, by itself, a criticism of quality. If a character or plot seemed to be heading down one route, or had the elements that made it possible to head down that route, and then actually went down another, that's just a choice of the editors. There are very few conceptual choices in writing that are inherently flawed. The issue only comes if you choose not to go down a route at all and leave the characters or plot hollow, contradictory, or aimless, or if the execution they ultimately used under the choices they made was poor. Alderheart is a significantly less appealing, unique, and complex character after his first book, and even more so after his third. But ultimately, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. He's boring in that he becomes a vehicle of the plot, but A Vision of Shadows, especially in its first half, was clearly intent on telling a good story and making the plot their focus, so there's no doubt in my mind that this was an intentional choice. And given the number of people who genuinely love the plot the arc came up with, I can't say it's an inherently awful choice either. The fact is, the first book of A Vision of Shadows presented us with a picture-perfect view of anxiety, with doubting thoughts and poor performance in a prevailing cycle, making each other worse and creating a rather painful life for our protagonist. That situation could have, and if I was making the choices, likely would have, led to a character arc about managing and getting past that anxiety with continuous monitoring to recognize and restructure his irrational, anxiety-induced thoughts, and positive, balanced relationships for him to rely on, with cats who could point out when his trains of thought weren't aligning with reality and motivate him to acknowledge his own successes. Of course, anxiety is a complex and varied issue, so even this hypothetical portrayal wouldn't cover everything a person with anxiety might go through or need. But showing even one version of its struggle could help people who have anxiety themselves to recognize and take steps to confront it in their own lives. However, that did not happen. Alderheart is, for most of his time in the spotlight, pretty boring. And that's okay, it's just the reason he doesn't appear on my list of favorite cats. I'm happy to let fans enjoy him though. As with anyone, if you take his basic building blocks and choose a different path for him, he has a lot to offer. Thank you for watching, and always remember that you are capable of more. Failure is difficult, sometimes painful, but it is also essential for success.